5th, 2016. Welcome to the Public Works and Gain Reduction Committee meeting. I'm joined by all of my colleagues on this committee, Mr. Rue, Mr. Price, Ms. Martinez, Mr. O'Farrell. Thank you all for joining us. Okay, if I can turn to your attention to the agenda. We have speaker cards on the regular agenda 1 through 7 from Wayne Spindler. Please come forward. Speak on all items. I'm going to give you 5 minutes for the totality of the cards that you completed for all items.
All right. That's the regular meeting.
Regular meeting, yes.
Okay. Well, including public comment, right? Including general public comment?
Not general public comment, no.
Okay.
Please stick to the item as well. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Well, we have item 1, closing a 10-foot wide walkway of the Golden State Freeway. Why not? I mean, you have a lot of people that are homeless that live there. 9th and Los Angeles streets. We need to have ceremonial signs put up. Yes, because it's a city in decay, we need to remember all of those who used to live here. And then item 3, the Curran Price Square. Yes, item 3 in honor of Curran Price should definitely be done because he's been there a long time. He's probably going to be here for another 8-9 years. So, yes, the 38th Street and Griffith Avenue, the Curran Price Ceremonial Square, that's a good thing to have because city council people should name things after themselves. Then we have, also in CD9, the Frank Dinkins Square. Well, I mean, it's not Persian Square like over on the west side, but it'll have to do. It's good enough because, again, we have to name squares and things after people, places, and things because that's going to increase the tourism value of the city. Yes, like trying to get the Olympics, for example. If somebody were to come to 45th Street in Ascot, and you told your Uber driver to go there, instead you'd say, no, I want to go to the Frank Dinkins Square. But what are we going to see in the Frank Dinkins Square? On this item, I think a community impact statement should have been submitted. What is there that will promote tourism? Not terrorism, tourism. So there's a lot of problems in that area, but, again, we should be more specific. Then we have our good friends down in CD 15. And changing the name of Center Street to Eastview Little League Drive. Yes, the Field of Dreams. It's no longer Center Street. No, it's going to be the Eastview Little League Drive, where all the children come play, where they learn to hit the softball, where they learn baseball skills and team member working groups. Like the health and mental health committees always talk about people working together. Yes, because we all have to work together and we have to teach the children to play Little League, don't we? Work well with others. Not go out and, for example, sign up 200 people for $5 a piece and don't know who they are. No, not that. We need to get together and play baseball and sports. So it should be the Little League Dodgers Drive, because we're a Dodger city, not an Angel city. So change it to the Little League Dodgers Drive. Then number 6, we're acquiring the rights from the Bivens Corporation to complete the Elysian Valley Greenway project. Who are these people at the Bivens Corporation? Are they campaign donors? They didn't list that. And the Ethics Commission didn't file an ethics statement and a fiscal statement on this because these corporations that are coming here and buying these votes and buying these things, we need to know exactly what specific intention the Bivens Corporation has. Do they have a financial interest or an indirect financial interest? Yes, we don't really know. And then finally, we turn over to one of my favorite areas, Abbott Kinney Boulevard. We're going to vacate a street on Abbott Kinney. Well, of course we're going to vacate streets on Abbott Kinney because that's where the real estate values are so high per square foot. Over-densification and development. You don't want public rights. You want private rights. And you want to use the government as a conduit to take away from the public and give it to your private developer friends. Vote no on number 7.
Okay, with that, colleagues, I'd like to take on consent items 1 through 7 before you, unless you want any, hold any of these items. Okay, hearing none, we'll approve items 1 through 7 on consent. At which point now I'd like to bring back up Mr. Spindler for 1 minute on general public comment.
Yes, there was a disturbing story in Thursday's LA Times. What is this about this, when you run for office and you have to have 200 or more campaign donors for matching funds? Now, when you look at the city's ethics commission, there's nobody listed that gave $5, $10, $20, $30. You can go ahead and trust but verify. That's what I did. But you see, nobody here is going to give a shit. It's going to be business as usual. Nobody's going to care that things were found out. Who are these 220 people? Who was the Santiago family? And why didn't they know they gave money to a campaign? Well, it doesn't matter. It's all in the LA Times imagination. They just ignore it.
Okay, with that, colleagues, we will adjourn the regular meeting of today's Public Works and Gain Reduction Committee meeting, and we are past now 1:15 p.m. We can now go into the special meeting. So, Mr. Clerk, if you can read item number 1 into the record, please.
Good afternoon, John White, City Clerk. Item 1, City Attorney Report and Ordinances relative to amending Section 56.11, Article 6, Chapter 5 of the LAMC to address the storage of personal property in public areas.
Thank you. Colleagues, this draft ordinance before us has been a long time in coming. In fact, this is now the 3rd time this committee has considered an ordinance amending Municipal Code 5611. And what we have attempted to do is strike an appropriate balance between the needs of the residents and public at large to access clean and sanitary public areas with the needs of the homeless who have no other alternatives for the storage of personal property but to keep it in public. This is a subject that I feel very passionately about and an area where I have a unique perspective and experience. And as a police officer, I arrested homeless people, I've helped and housed homeless people, and I used Section 5611 as I participated in those Skid Row cleanups that resulted in the Levon case and subsequent injunction. Now, I'm first to admit we didn't go far enough to protect the homeless' rights to due process, but I also think it's important to recognize that our top responsibility as elected officials is to ensure public safety, and sometimes it's necessary to empower our officers to place someone under arrest in order to do so. Now, arresting a homeless person is not something that we take joy in. It's a tool that is only used when necessary. In fact, I recall going into a roll call, checking in as a police officer. Never once said I look forward to arresting a homeless individual. In fact, I did look forward to helping those in need. And there's much discussion recently about not criminalizing the homeless, and I agree with that we should not make crimes out of actions that it's impossible for a homeless person to avoid by the nature of being homeless. But that doesn't mean that we should give a free pass for a homeless person to commit quality of life crimes. We have the right to set community standards and enforce those standards, especially when necessary to ensure public health and safety. I'd like to bring up the city attorney, representing the city attorney's office, Valerie Flores, who is here with us. Colleagues, I have a series of questions, and I'll turn it over to each and every one of you. And lastly, before we go to public comment, I'd like to propose a recommendation and amendment. Ms. Flores, thank you so much for your hard work in putting together this draft ordinance. Can you please give us an overview of what's before us today?
Certainly. Good afternoon, council members. My name is Valerie Flores. I'm a senior assistant city attorney. Pursuant to council motion, we are returning today with a draft of two ordinances. One will address commercial property, and the other will address personal property of individuals. I'm going to just spend a few minutes on the commercial property ordinance. We have designated that ordinance to be codified in the municipal code at section 5612. It's fairly straightforward. It's actually modeled on a similar San Francisco ordinance. And
now this is item number 2, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's take both items. John, if we can do that. Sure. Why don't you read item 2 into the record?
Item 2, City Attorney Report and Ordinance relative to amending Section 56.12, Article 6, Chapter 5 of the LEMC to address commercial property encroachment onto public sidewalks and streets.
Okay, very good.
Right. As part of the council's motion, we were asked to separate into two separate ordinances, the individual and commercial property, so that's what we've done. So 5612 will replace an antiquated loading and unloading ordinance, and basically will apply to any person or firm having control of a brick and mortar premise, and it will preclude them from obstructing the sidewalk or street by placing anything on the sidewalk or street without a permit. There is an exception built into the ordinance for active unloading and loading of items for the commercial establishment, and also obviously for any permit that the merchant has to use any portion of the sidewalk. Similarly, it will be unlawful for the owner of a premises to, as part of a lease or contract, rent or lease any portion of the city street or sidewalk to a tenant for purposes of putting merchandise out on the street or sidewalk. So again, it's fairly straightforward. Do you have any questions, or shall I move on?
Any questions on 5612, item number 2? Go ahead, Ms. Martinez. Push your button.
Ms. Flores, for me, the most frustrating part of adopting these ordinances is the enforcement piece.
Right.
And so in adopting this ordinance, what for the enforcement piece?
For the commercial ordinance, it would be street services or LAPD.
Oh, we have both? Or
Yes.
okay.
And unlike 5611, for violations of 5612, those will, like any other section in the municipal code, be governed by the general catch-all provision for penalties, which is codified at 1100 of the municipal code. So it allows for prosecution either as an infraction or for second offenses as a misdemeanor.
And how would the encampments be addressed by property owners?
I'm sorry, pardon?
How would the encampments be addressed by property owners? Because a lot of the times my office gets contacted, not only are these encampments in the public right away, but sometimes they're actually in front of a property owner, and that person doesn't know what to do, what resources are available, and LAPD sometimes just cannot attend to all those calls.
So a personal property that's part of an encampment will be addressed under 5611, not 5612.
We're doing 12 right now.
5612 will only be enforced against shop owners or premises owners who put their wares or items out on the street or sidewalk as part of their business. So there's a separate ordinance, 5612.
I understand that, but I'm just from the business owner's perspective.
Right.
What is that person to do with an encampment right outside of their business?
Right, so they would notify our Bureau of Sanitation, and there are protocols being developed by the Bureau of Sanitation that will be consistent with 5611 because the encampment would be the personal property.
Right, I understand that.
Not the merchant's property. So it will be handled under 5611, similar to how it's handled now. A complaint comes in, the Bureau of Sanitation does an assessment about whether it's on city property, is it a homeless encampment, and they're developing protocols about how they address those encampments.
And would vacant properties or buildings be addressed in this ordinance as well?
All public areas. So any area that is owned, controlled, or managed by the City of Los Angeles will be subject to 5611 if it involves an individual's property.
And are there penalties involved with this ordinance as well?
When you say this, do you mean 5611 or
5612.
5612, yes. For commercial encroachment onto streets or sidewalks, that will be citable as an infraction or punishable as a misdemeanor within the discretion of the officer and the city attorney's office.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
And again, just by way of rationale, because merchants do have someplace else to keep their items, there's no reason why it shouldn't, the violations of 5612 should not be treated like all other violations of the municipal code.
Again, let's focus on item 2, then we can go back to 5611. So we'll focus on 2 right now and then approve or whatever direction we want to go here. Any questions on the commercial piece on 5612? Mr. Rue, followed by Mr. Price.
So you said the penalty phase of it is first. Can you repeat that again?
Right. So unless otherwise specified, all provisions in the municipal code are enforceable as an infraction or misdemeanor within the discretion of the police officer and the city attorney's office.
So there's no monetary fine?
Pardon?
No monetary fine?
Well, an infraction does carry with it a monetary fine.
Do you know what that is?
Again, it's up to the discretion of the prosecutor, but there's a maximum, I believe, of $1,000.
$1,000. Because we're talking about, tables and chairs or, products that, they're goods that they could put out in front of their store, right? That's what we're talking about right now. And if they're permitted, it's okay, but sometimes some problems are, even though they're permitted for it, they go above and beyond where they're permitted for. I mean, let's just say if they're permitted for putting tables and chairs for 4 feet or 6 feet, but they encroach out into the rest of the street, so it's not ADA accessible. Isn't that building and safety, or who enforces that part? Permits?
Well, I believe street
Still street
services,
services?
if it's on the sidewalk.
Their street investigative unit.
Yeah. Right. Right. If you have specific questions.
Any questions
about
for street services, their investigative unit?
So the permits are given by street services, isn't it?
Yeah,
The permits.
that. Yeah,
I can, Ted Jordan, Public
Go ahead,
Works General
Ted.
Counsel. So if you're talking about a restaurant, the permit for the sidewalk dining is issued by the Bureau of Engineering as a revocable permit. If the permittee exceeds the scope of that, so they have their tables and chairs where the permit does not allow, then street services, the enforcement division could issue a citation for that. The permit itself, though, is a revocable permit issued by the Bureau of Engineering.
Okay. So the enforcement is street services.
Yes.
If I could just ask, later on, I mean, could we, if we wanted to look at the fine structure, because you're saying it's up to $1,000, if we wanted to take a look at that again, we would have that opportunity, right, to...
Yes, you can make recommendations for a different fine structure.
That's fine.
Mr. Price?
Thank you. Kind of building on that, and again, thanks for your help. This has been a real effort by lots of folks, and so we appreciate your efforts. But I know this is modeled pretty much after the San Francisco experience, correct? So
Correct.
what's their structure in terms of fines and penalties and
Again, like Los Angeles, they have a similar structure where any violation of their sort of health and safety rules are prosecutable either as a fine or misdemeanor. But again, the council as a body has the ability, by including a different structure in the ordinance, to specify any penalty structure. But if none is specified, then it will default to Section 1100 of the Municipal Code, which again gives discretion to the street services officers and the city attorney's office in fashioning a penalty that is appropriate for the...
Up to $1,000, is that the?
Correct.
Up to $1,000. Yeah.
Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick clarification. So the penalties found under Section 1100 of the Municipal Code, not to jump ahead here, but both 5611 and 5612, are the penalties identical under that section?
Correct.
Thank you.
Except that with regard to 5611, as you'll see when we discuss that, there are only a few things that are subject to 1100.
Thank you. Very good.
Okay, I have a card on item 2, so we can put item 2 to bed. Mr. Spindler for 1 minute, and then we can go to item 1.
It's good to know 1 out of 15 council people represents the people. Thank you, David Rue, for that question. Why are we trying to find businesses when we're supposed to be fighting homelessness? Why do you guys keep sneaking and introducing fines against businesses? This is about homelessness. This is not about finding and making more money off the backs of our small business people because they put a little something in front of a tienda. They put a little something on the display, 1 inch, 2 inches from their storefront. There's called local ligatures and customs. And a lot of businesses put items out in front of their businesses on sidewalks. This has been going on ever since I've been in LA. I've been in LA 40 years. So we need to stop penalizing businesses for existing. So no $1,000 fines. Get rid of that. It's ridiculous and it's disgusting.
Okay, colleagues, special item number 2. Any objection to item number 2, special? Hearing none, we'll approve unanimously item number 2 and send that. I believe it's going to go also to Homeless and Poverty Committee as well. Okay, that'll be the order of this committee. Okay, if I can bring back Ms. Flores on the personal property as relates to 5611. And, I believe we need to create an environment where service providers can have a stronger influence than of the criminal community. And we need practical enforcement rules, enforceable rules rather, that will help clean up our streets and compel homeless residents to choose services and treatment over encampment and addiction. Can you share with us if a tent is erected during the day and the owner refuses to deconstruct it after being instructed by a police officer, what recourse would that officer have based on what's before us today?
Well, we believe under this ordinance that the first encounter regarding a tent would likely be, hopefully, with Bureau of Sanitation, not a police officer. But yes, there will be first a request to have the owner of the tent deconstruct it if it's erected, in violation of the ordinance, meaning the daytime. If the owner of the tent refuses to deconstruct it, when it's unlawful to have the tent up, then the city may deconstruct it.
Okay, excuse me, no object, please. So,
right, at that point, right.
Sergeant, if you can please.
Right, at that point, a city official would have the discretion to deconstruct the tent and leave it there, or impound the tent and take it to storage for 90 days.
And this would be solely the, please, if you continue
again,
that, you will be removed. Thank you.
And again, I believe that the Bureau of Sanitation is working on protocols that will discuss when it's appropriate to deconstruct and leave the tent there, and I would imagine that they would be focusing on people who are otherwise cooperative or, haven't been told on numerous occasions to take their tent down. So in those instances, likely the tent would be deconstructed by a city employee and left on site.
So aside from the Department of Sanitation, would a business improvement district staff have the ability to move property that's placed in front of a business or move property that's in violation of this order?
No, this ordinance deals with what's lawful and unlawful in the city and what the city may do in response to personal items in the public area.
Okay.
The only exception would be if, in section, I believe it's 8, relating to attachments. If something is attached to private property, but it creates an obstruction into the public right-of-way, then this ordinance will empower the city to remove the obstruction or attachment. And again, deconstruct it with the ability to either leave it in place after it's unattached or impounded.
Okay, the ECOs, the Environmental Compliance Officers under the Department of Sanitation, so as of the ordinance before us today, they would only have the authority to deconstruct the tent if the individual refuses to take down an encampment or tent. Is that my understanding?
Correct, and if it is up during a time when it's not permitted to be up, as you may
Right,
have
what's
seen.
before us today, right? Maybe I can bring up the Department of Sanitation, the Watershed Protection Division.
Good afternoon. Steve Pedersen, Chief Environmental Compliance Inspector, Bureau of Sanitation.
Thank you, Steve. How many ECOs do we have, Environmental Compliance Officers, citywide?
We have approximately about 16. We have 4 additional ones in training. They have not been fully trained yet. They've been newly hired. But currently we have 16.
16. So if we have a situation where LAPD in Sylmar is trying to take down a tent or deconstruct a tent for someone who's refusing to, and I have a ECO in San Pedro, they would have to request the ECO based on what's before us today, the ordinance today. Is that my understanding? And they would have to give an estimated time of arrival from San Pedro to Sylmar. Is that my understanding?
That is correct. One must also bear in mind that we also have other tasks that we don't simply deal with the homeless encampments. We deal with our MS4 permit by the state. And that MS4 requires us to do industrial commercial inspections. It also requires us to do illicit discharge investigations and investigations of construction sites. So the 16 that I mentioned are not all involved in a day's work doing homeless encampment.
Wow. And that's the most visible quality of life issue that we're seeing throughout the city today.
Yes, I understand.
Your current staffing levels, do you have the ability to immediately respond citywide, say if LAPD were to request removal of a tent or encampment?
It would strain our resources since we do respond citywide to these other programs also.
Okay. And my other question, follow-up, is do you have the ability to proactively patrol and deconstruct tents on a daily basis? I'm going to assume, based on what you're saying, you don't.
That is correct.
Okay. Ms. Flores, can you walk us through, I'm sorry, I'm playing musical chairs here. Can you walk us through the proposed ordinance that's before us today, and maybe we can shed some light?
Certainly. I did want to clarify, however, that the Bureau of Sanitation doesn't have exclusive jurisdiction over removal of tents. If LAPD were on site, they would have the same authority to request that the tent be taken down by the owner, and if there's a refusal, take the tent down. It's just the goal of the city is to have protocols in place so that, hopefully there won't be encounters where
Sure.
these sorts
And
of issues arise.
I mean, based on my experience, majority of the time you're going to have compliance. I would say 98, 99% you're going to have compliance of these individuals. Today, I mean, I'll defer to Captain Ord. I don't see that happening today, but this is why we've seen some inaction around the city of LA, because our city family, police department, sanitation needs direction, and this is what we need, some urgency in addressing those quality of life issues to ensure that, one, we help the people that need the most help, and also be responsive to the constituents that we serve. So you can walk us through that.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is start in the Declaration of Legislative Intent. In the motion, we were specifically asked to describe the balance that the city was trying to achieve of maintaining safe, clean, and usable sidewalks and streets, while at the same time respecting the rights of individuals who have no place to store their belongings, to be able to keep a limited quantity of items with them. So we changed the Declaration of Intent to make that balancing goal clear. Next, in the definitions, there is a new definition, subsection D, for essential personal property, which will be a limit of about 2 cubic feet or a backpack's worth of belongings. But that section will not come into play, as we'll discuss later in the ordinance, until the city provides more storage or subsidized transportation. The next definition that's new is subsection E, and that deals with excess personal property. And that's been defined to include anything that is over what someone could fit in a 60-gallon container with the lid closed. So under this ordinance, as you'll see, individuals will be allowed to maintain 60 gallons worth of personal property.
And that would be equivalent to a half of a blue bin, the smaller size of the blue bins, right? Is that my understanding?
Yeah.
It would be equivalent to one of our black trash cans.
Okay.
Next, we've changed definition H, the definition of person, to make clear that this only applies to human individuals, because now that we've separated out the commercial property ordinance that applies to firms, this ordinance is only meant to apply to individuals who have no place else to store their belongings. We also have added a definition for storage facility to make clear that a storage facility is a facility that provides free of charge storage for homeless persons to store up to 60 gallons worth of personal property. And again, I'm just highlighting the new or different definitions. Many of these other definitions were in the prior ordinance. We have refined the definition of tent because there was a little bit of confusion, I think, from the last ordinance about makeshift shelters and tiny houses. So what we want to make clear in this ordinance is that tent means a collapsible shelter that's made of a fabric such as nylon or canvas, or a tarp that's stretched across supports. The key component being collapsible. Because again, although you'll see later in the ordinance, we are going to permit tents to be up during the nighttime, they need to be something that's collapsible and quickly able and kind of designed to be taken down. And also that the tent be, when it's collapsed, capable of fitting within the 60-gallon limit. We also, for clarity, have gone ahead and defined attended and unattended, and that's in definition Q. And the definition of attended allows anyone who claims ownership of the property to be deemed the owner. So we don't have a situation where we're having to demand proof or otherwise struggling to try to identify who owns what. And actually, it will probably be less problematic now that people are allowed to keep some limited quantity, 60 gallons worth of materials, but we just want to make the ordinance a little more clear. The meat of the ordinance is actually in sections 3, 7, and 8. So the way we've structured the ordinance is we wanted to state, what we were trying to regulate, and then discuss what rights the city would have if persons aren't following the regulations. So the first thing in subsection A we deal with is unattended personal property. For unattended personal property, the city must provide 24 hours posted notice, and if the city comes back and the personal items are still in the public area, then the city may impound them. At that point, the city is required to put a second notice in the area to let a person who returns know where to claim the impounded items. In subsection B, we deal with attended personal property. And what we provide here is that no person shall store more than 60 gallons of attended personal property in the public right-of-way. If more than 60 gallons is stored in the public right-of-way, again, after a 24-hour notice period, the city can impound the excess personal property and provide notice to the person about where to pick up that excess property, and that it'll be stored for 90 days. In subsection C, we note that no person may store property in a way that it interferes with a city maintenance operation, including street cleanings, and it provides that the city may temporarily move personal items that are interfering, regardless of volume, not just this over 60 gallons, but the city may temporarily move the personal property in order to complete the city maintenance operation. And the city may also impound items that are interfering with the city operation, again, providing post-removal notice so that the person who is the owner of the items can claim them. In subsection D, we deal with the need to balance the rights of our disabled residents. So the ordinance says that no person shall store personal property of any volume in the public right-of-way if it will impede our ability to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And without notice at all, even 24-hour notice, the city has the right to remove and impound that personal property that's impeding ADA compliance, but we will be required to provide post-removal notice so the person who owns the belongings will be able to know where and how to claim them. Similarly, if personal property is stored in a way that it impedes access to a driveway or an entrance or an exit, is it within 10 feet of those, the city without notice may impound those items so long as it provides post-removal notice. Also, with regard to public areas that have already clearly posted closure times, like some of our libraries or our LA City Mall, without prior notice, the city can, after the posted closing hour, impound any materials or personal items that are left there, so long as, again, they provide a post-removal notice about where to claim those. Similar to the prior ordinance, there is still the ability of the city to pick up and discard any personal property that is a threat to health and safety, and also the same with regard to anything that's evidence of a crime or contraband. There is a slight deviation in the way we're handling bulky items, which we do in subsection 3I. Still, we note that no person may store a bulky item in a public area, but we do, and it also gives the city the ability to immediately impound and discard any bulky item, except if the bulky item is used as a shelter. If the bulky item is used as a shelter, the city has to provide 24-hour notice before picking it up and discarding it. In subsection J and K, this is where we've actually submitted two alternative ordinances. So the council motion asked us to work with the CAO, which we did, in terms of figuring out when the city meets certain thresholds of providing additional storage or subsidized transportation, whether we could further restrict the amount of personal property that a person may store in a public area. So first, in Alternative A, we followed the council's direction, and we have provided that if the city reaches a storage goal where we can provide one 60-gallon bin for every 3 homeless persons, then we can, within a 2-mile radius of any storage facility, require that people store only 2 cubic feet or the essential personal property if they're within 2 miles of a storage facility. The way we arrived at the ratio of 1 bin for every 3 homeless persons is currently we have a storage facility that's been operational for a couple years in Skid Row. According to LAWSA, about 1/3 of all the city's homeless reside in the greater Skid Row downtown area. So we looked at the number of homeless persons residing in the Skid Row area and the number of bins provided, and we noted that about 1 in 3 homeless persons in the Skid Row area is currently using one of the voluntary bin storage, so they go voluntarily check in their items. So if you extrapolate that citywide, it would require that we increase storage so that we could accommodate 1 bin for every 3 persons.
And again, how was the 2-mile radius? How did you conclude on that? How was that?
That was actually a radius that was in the council motion. So again, that's a policy call. We just simply repeated it. And then we were also asked to look at restricting storage if the city provides subsidized transportation to homeless persons to reach a storage facility. So again, what we did is we looked at the city's shuttle bus program, the DASH program, and determined that in a 60-minute period, accounting for traffic and different times of the day, a shuttle bus can travel about 10 miles an hour. So we are suggesting, or in this ordinance, of course, subject to policy change, that if the city does provide subsidized transportation, that the city could restrict a person to no more than 2 cubic feet of property if they're within 10 miles of a storage facility where they get subsidized transportation to and from. Now, in the other alternative, as we were going through this laborious process of trying to comply with the original motion, we wondered if the city might want to consider a different alternative that we believe and the CAO believes might provide the city with more immediate relief and more flexibility. And so in Alternative Ordinance B, the way the city would handle the increase in storage or the increase in subsidized transportation would be to have the CAO report any time a new storage facility was opened or capacity was increased or transportation was made available. And then the council could, by resolution, in that impacted geographical area where the new storage facility was located or the transportation was available, determine what radius was the appropriate radius in terms of limiting people to only essential personal property. So that's the difference between Ordinance A and Ordinance B. Next, Section 4 of the ordinance is the same as the prior ordinance and dictates what must be included in the notice, the 24-hour pre-removal notice, and also the post-removal notice in terms of how to find and collect personal property and how long it'll be stored. 5 is also similar to the Section 5 is also similar to the prior ordinance, and it requires the city to hold for 90 days any impounded personal property, after which it can be discarded if not claimed. Similarly, Section 6 deals with how a person claims repossession of their personal property, and again, no ID is required. The person can prove ownership merely by explaining where the items were stored and giving a reasonably particular description of what was there. Section 7 is significantly new. It's the ban on the erection of tents during certain daytime hours. And like the prior ordinance, this ordinance prohibits the erection of a tent from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., but we have, for your consideration, exempted times when it's raining or the temperature falls below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. If you agree with that recommendation, then it would be lawful in, for example, a rain event, even if it's daytime, for someone to keep their tent up. And then if a tent is erected in violation of this section, the city can deconstruct it, and again, that could be LAPD or whoever encounters it first might be Bureau of Sanitation. And then the tent can either be deconstructed and left in place or impounded. So 8 is also similar. It precludes people from attaching personal property to private property or public property, and that's very similar to the prior version. Again, this ordinance prohibits illegal dumping. If someone is seen actually driving up in a car and dumping an old couch on the side of the road, that will still be unlawful under this ordinance. One of the more significant changes in the ordinance is that we have addressed council's request that we decriminalize the mere act of being homeless and simply focus on some sort of actual resistance to the city keeping the streets clean. And so we have a new Section 10, and I'd like to run through that briefly. Now, in order to be unlawful, not only does a person have to store excess property over the limit, but they also have to willfully resist, delay, or obstruct a city employee from moving, removing, impounding, or discarding the personal property that violates the ordinance. The language we selected here, willfully resist, delay, or obstruct, we got from sort of criminal law. There's a well-developed history on what it means to resist, willfully resist. And so rather than create a new definition that might be hard to interpret, we've used that sort of well-established definition. We also, with regard to tents and other sorts of shelters, it's actually there's a two-step process before it can become unlawful. First, it has to be the person has to have put the shelter or the tent up in violation of the ordinance, and they have to also refuse to take it down. At that point, then they also have to resist the city official taking the tent down for them before they can be found to have engaged in any unlawful activity. So again, it would require actually.
Sir, that's going to be your last warning. Please do not disrupt this meeting. You will be asked to leave.
Again, it would require a tent to be up when it's unlawful to be up. It would require the person who owns the tent to refuse to take it down and also to willfully resist a city employee from taking it down. And the same is true for bulky items. And also this ordinance would still criminalize illegal dumping. And so in essence, you can store up to 60 gallons and keep it with you. You can store excess property, but it could be impounded, and there's still no criminal penalty. It's only if you refuse and then willfully interfere with a city official when they're trying to impound property or take down a tent or remove a bulky item, that any criminal penalty could come into play. Lastly, as requested, this ordinance designates the Bureau of Sanitation as the designated administrative authority, and I believe they are in the process of promulgating protocols that will flesh out a lot of the details about how the ordinance will be implemented. This ordinance also has a severability clause and an urgency clause. Do you have any questions?
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Flores? Ms. Martinez?
Sorry. We got any clarification on subsection 3E that I believe is included in A and B as well? The regulation and impoundment of stored personal property, discard of certain stored personal property. And I have a question about, what does that mean? Does it mean that if someone moves their stuff across the street, they're no longer in violation?
No.
What does that mean?
They have to take it out of a public area.
Okay. And then at that point, it becomes a violation.
Well, any property that remains in the public area after 24-hour notice,
They're already in violation.
depending on what it is, the city can either impound it or discard it.
So even moving it across the street, those folks would...
That's not considered, that would not be considered removing the property from storage in a public area.
Okay. And then under subsection 6, repossession, I think I asked this question earlier when we were talking about 5612. What if this property is in front of a business or private property? I also want to make sure that it includes the vacant buildings. What do we do in that situation?
Well, if it were a public building, then it would be, then it would be treated under 5611. If it's a private building, then I believe there would be, sort of, the private property owner would have the rights that a private property owner would have in terms, including trespass or whatever other remedies are available to them. So this ordinance only deals with public areas, areas that are managed, owned, or controlled by the city.
Okay. Is there anything in this ordinance that would protect private property?
Well, again, private property is already protected under the, criminal trespass laws. The only thing that touches private property in this ordinance is that no one is allowed to attach items to private property if it interferes with the public right-of-way.
Okay. That's all I have for now.
So the business owner would have to post no trespassing.
And that's the only
clearly,
way for
right?
that person to be able to clear
Right.
someone's belongings on their private property.
Then from what I remember, it's a private person arrest from the property owner. Is that my understanding?
Right, but that would be outside of this. The city would
Completely
not be
outside of
involved in that.
5611, right?
And then we can get into subsection 10B, which I think you're going to discuss as well.
amend
Okay,
as well.
I'll let Mr. Buscaino do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Martinez. Ms. Martinez makes a good point as far as relocating the issue. Oftentimes, we have seen that throughout the city, specifically in San Pedro, where the 72-hour notice was posted, and then the encampments and a number of personal belongings get shifted across the street. Now, we're cutting that from 72 to 24-hour, but once that notice is posted, it would include all public spaces in the vicinity?
All public spaces.
All public spaces.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, can you please remove that individual, Sergeant? Thank you. In the rear to the right. He's been given numerous warnings. Thank you.
So to piggyback to Joe's concern.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to talk
Okay,
over him.
Mr. O'Farrell, hold
To piggyback
on.
on Joe's concern,
Mitch, hold on.
how large would that vicinity be? I'm going to talk over him. How large would that vicinity be in terms of a notice? Would it be 50 feet? Would it be 100 feet?
There is no vicinity requirement. So
Okay.
once an item has been posted, it has
General area?
to leave any public area.
Okay, any public area. All right. So it's by definition not specified, so it would be determined that you could remove in a certain area. One other question I have.
Okay,
One
thank you.
other, just clarification, Ms. Flores, you mentioned in item 3, subsection B, You referred to the 60-gallon container several times, but it is not specified actually in the subsection, and I just wanted a point of clarification for that.
That's because now excess personal property is a defined term, which means more than a 60-gallon
Okay,
container.
so that's why it is inferred automatically throughout the entire ordinance because of that provision.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any others? Mr. Price.
Refresh our memories again. How do A and B differ from the original, from the initial proposal that the council was considering? And what do
Attended and-
these
yes.
options give us? What kind of flexibility do these options give us?
Right. So A deals with unattended property, and B deals with attended property. And we needed to separate them out in this ordinance because the prior ordinance didn't allow people to store any volume of property in the public right-of-way. This ordinance allows currently people to store up to 60 gallons worth of property. But we wanted to make clear that if property is unattended after it's been posted for 24 hours, that the city can impound it. Even if it's below the 60-gallon, rather than just leaving it in the public right-of-way, if it's unattended, the city can take all of it. But if it's attended, the city has to leave 60 gallons of it. So that's why it's now broken out into two subsections.
Subject to further discussion, but I think this is certainly a good approach. And I think it balances the interests of individuals who are homeless and citizens who are concerned about the right-of-way and being able to move freely. So I certainly support this proposal, the flexibility of giving the city flexibility of working with the individuals is also going to be important. What kind of feedback did we get from the advocates on this approach?
We haven't had any feedback yet. We just did get a letter this morning from Legal Aid, but it actually, in our view, did have some sort of erroneous facts, and but we're open to meeting with anyone that the council feels is helpful for us to meet with. But again, we tried to stay very true to the council motion, and that was the amended motion 16A. Where we've differed, we've pointed that out in our transmittal report and here today, in terms of, for example, allowing people to keep their tents up when it's raining, even if it's daytime. So that was something we added just for your consideration. And then also even our alternative B, which would allow the city, upon creation of new storage or transportation, to deal with property limits in that impacted geographical area instead of waiting until citywide we have sufficient storage.
I would agree with Mr. Price. We have come a long way with this ordinance that's before us, specifically allowing individuals who are homeless the ability to keep their personal belongings, allow them to sleep on the sidewalk, and also being able to provide the necessary services. So this is really an ordinance before us that I feel strikes that appropriate balance. Mr. Rue?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick few questions. When it comes to enforcement, deconstruction of the tents, and everything we spoke about, you said the lead agency is the Bureau of Sanitation?
Correct.
But can you also elaborate, because they're not the only one who could do it. It could be any city employees, right? Can you
Correct.
just restate that fact?
Yes, so the ordinance is specifically drafted so that it says, it uses the term city employee. So it could be Bureau of Sanitation, it could be LAPD. I think under the protocols, the city is striving to ensure that there's outreach, that the city employees, sort of our interaction with the homeless is more to help them understand what services are available, do outreach, and then deal with them in terms of cleaning up the streets. And it would only be if there was some reason for LAPD to get involved, or they were on patrol and saw something, that it would be an encounter where LAPD would be dealing directly with the homeless. But they can. It's any city employee.
And now that we got this ordinance back, what's the timeline going forward? In particular, the protocols, LAPD and all the other subsequent departments, Bureau of Sanitation, developing the protocols to determine exactly how this ordinance is carried out.
Well, I believe they're well underway. I know the city, with the guidance of the mayor's office, has been working diligently on the protocols. But one of the reasons we transmitted the ordinance as soon as we could was so that the departments developing the protocols had some framework so they could make sure there's consistency. So now that we've transmitted, I believe that the protocol should follow shortly.
I think 14 days, 30 days, 45 days. Just a rough.
Steve Pedersen, Bureau of Sanitation. We're looking at 90 days upon adoption of the ordinance.
In the protocol, the developing of the protocols, 90 days?
Yes.
Last question. What's the position of the City Attorney's Office, LAPD, Sheriff's Department on the current ordinance, and I guess Bureau of Sanitation? I am assuming everyone's in support of the current ordinance as is?
We believe the current ordinance is lawful. Again, we believe that we tried very hard to honor the intent of Motion 16A. Where we've differed, where we've thought in the process of drafting the ordinance that we might want to make recommendations for your consideration, we've called those out in the report. So yes, we do believe this is a lawful order consistent with your policy request.
True. And we talked about interacting with our homeless. I think the direction of this body is to ensure that the city employees, LAPD included, that they offer on the interaction between everyone and the homeless individuals to make sure they include and offer supportive services and fair and compassionate treatment, continue to show mercy for those that are most vulnerable in our community. I do want to bring up the Los Angeles Police Department, Captain Orb, Area Commanding Officer of Central Area. To Mr. Rue's point, if you can just share with us what's before us today, give us your thoughts, and do you believe that the tents that are erected during the day pose a public safety hazard? And also share with us the relationship between the criminal element and those who continue to prey upon the most vulnerable. Please, excuse me, if you can just share that.
Yes, sir.
And the encampments and tents in the downtown LA area.
Yes, sir. So over the course of the last 4 years, since we've dealt with the property issues on the sidewalk and dealing with the tents that are erected on the sidewalk throughout the day and night, we have seen an increase in criminal activity associated with the tents. Several times a week and sometimes daily, our officers are making arrests related to the tents involving narcotics being housed inside the tents. We have prostitution occurring in the tents, sexual assaults occurring inside the tents. So clearly a problem in that area for the use of narcotics. We've also found people that have been overdosed inside the tents, and they conceal them, sometimes delaying services being brought to them, where if somebody had overdosed on the streets, a citizen may see them, call 911 for help. Sometimes we have seen that has gone unnoticed because the tents are concealing them. So clearly a problem. We would love to see the tents brought down during the daytime, during the non-Jones hours. We feel that it would provide a much more safer environment and also to help us with the obstructions on the right-of-way of the sidewalks.
Captain, when a homeless individual is causing a nuisance or breaking the law, do officers usually try to seek voluntary compliance, or do they go straight for the arrest?
Our goal is always, our goal is already
Excuse me.
Voluntary compliance. We do everything within our means to get them to, in this case, would be to take down the tent on their own, and so that way we wouldn't have to be the primary persons to force a tent to be brought down. The goal is always for them to voluntarily comply.
Share with us the Safer Cities approach that we saw in downtown Los Angeles, how some of please stop disrupting the meeting, please.
So we're currently under a team called Reset. It's an adjustment of safer cities. We've changed the areas into 4 zones, which coincide with the 3 Cs that are about to unfold at any time. So our area is a much smaller area of responsibility. And in doing so, we made 4 outreach footbeats that are responsible for going out, making public contact, identifying those individuals who have need. We also have 2 LASA workers that are embedded with the unit, and the purpose of that is that gives the greater opportunity for the officers and the LASA team to interact with the individuals and to find them services, and it's been very successful so far.
Yeah, we've experienced that as well down at the harbor. We have a quality of life car, and working collectively with the emergency response team, with LASA, and also the Department of Mental Health with the county. It's kind of it is a trifecta approach, and we've seen and housed almost 80 individuals down in the harbor area. Really pleased with that effort. I want to ask you, as far as the enforcement, we need, I truly feel that we need practical, again, enforceable rules and enforcement with teeth. Do you feel and believe it'll be possible to enforce this daytime tent ban if officers do not have the abilities to arrest?
Well, I think that it has to be a component. I mean, voluntary compliance is going to take you a certain length of this proposal. But after that, there are going to be people that resist and that do not want to take their tents down. So you also have to have an enforcement arm that goes along with it. Again, our goal is for voluntary compliance. We would like everybody.
Last resort is the arrest.
Yes, sir.
And that's something that we need to continue to push for. But I based on my experience, you'll have a number of individuals who will, on their own, abide and on their own have voluntary compliance. So, any questions for Captain Orb? Yes.
Captain, I represent a completely different part of the city, but what has been your experience with folks who just outright refuse to get any services? A couple of months ago, we cleared a 300-person encampment in my district for the 3rd time. And out of the people we spoke to, about 2 people agreed to accept the services from LASA and all the other different agencies that we had on the ground. What has been your experience in the harbor area?
Well, I could tell you in the Skid Row area, there is areas of Skid Row where people are engaged in a lifestyle where many of them would like to stay on the sidewalk, participate in alcohol use, and participate in drug use. There's also a group of people, excuse me, I'm talking. Thank you very much. There's also a group of people that are mentally ill, and they may not meet the criteria of mental health, but still they're having difficulties making decisions on their own, and that interferes with their ability to go and seek help. So that's how I viewed it, as the chemical abuse and substance abuse and mental illness. All of those things combined are what leads to people being attached to the sidewalks.
Mr. O'Farrell. Very good. Questions? Very good. Mr. Price.
Some of the other tools that are available in addition to an arrest. What other tools are available to enforce compliance?
Well, again, our goal is voluntary compliance, and we're talking about property on the sidewalk. So, to me, first of all, we have to look at what is a reasonable amount of property on the sidewalk. Is it a suitcase? Is it a shopping cart size? Or is it half a block? Because we've dealt with people over the course of the last 4 years that can occupy an entire block worth of items.
Yeah, no, I've seen them also. But what are the tools we have to encourage compliance aside from arrest? What else can you do?
The Voluntary compliance is what we use. We try to seek property locations like the Chrysalis Bin Center where they could store their property. But again, it comes down to the actual size of the property that we're dealing with. Is it manageable or is it not manageable? There are times where folks that are being arrested, their property will be taken in as excess property and stored in a warehouse facility. So it all depends on exactly, the situation.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, colleagues, we need to ensure, we're going to get to comment cards here in a minute, but we need to ensure to keep our public spaces public. And at the same time, balance the fact that the importance of allowing individuals to sleep on the sidewalk based on court cases. And we're doing just that. Based on what's before us, we will allow those individuals who are homeless to sleep on the sidewalk between the hours of 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. After 6 a.m., we need to ensure that sidewalks are made public. I recently, just going onto the on-ramp here next to City Hall, where an entire block was filled with encampments, and it forced individuals who were walking, forced them onto the street because the sidewalk was blocked. And I do know that what's before us is that balance that's needed in the city. Mr. O'Farrell had a question for Ms. Flores. Thank you, Captain Orb.
Are good?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your work on all of this. I think that probably no ordinance has been drafted with more thoughtfulness than this one since I've been on the City Council. So all the good work that's gone into this. But I have a question in relation to number 7 on the ordinance. And I'd like to just check in with you and see what your thoughts are, and maybe my colleagues would like to weigh in as well. My concern about item 7 is that in an abundance of compassion, that there may be, very likely will be scheduled public works work when it's below 50 degrees or when it's sprinkling outside a little bit in terms of sidewalk replacement or repairs or street resurfacing or gutter clearing in advance of El Nino rains, you name it, the gamut, tree trimming, LADWP work. And a lot of that work is going to happen when it's below 50 degrees in our public right-of-way. Would this ordinance prohibit scheduled work if there is a tent?
No. We believe that under Section 3C of the ordinance, any property, regardless of amount or time of day, that is interfering with a city maintenance can be temporarily moved or even impounded if 24 hours notice of the operation is given.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to check with that. It gave me a bit of a concern. But, all right. So you're confident that supersedes item 7 in the
Yes,
ordinance?
but we can make that clear when we go to full council.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Price.
Thank you. Question regarding regarding options that we have up to an arrest. What other enforcement techniques are available?
Again, I think that will be laid out quite in detail in the protocols. I think the goal of the protocols will be to explain the amount of outreach the city is already doing and will continue to do using LASA and other homeless service providers to approach encampments and try to get people to use services and encourage them to use services. I think also if people know that, now there are, sort of limits on what they can do and where they can do it, that might actually help people be more encouraged to accept services. And I did just want to address, may I go back? So if you look at item number 7, it specifically says that, I think it's the second to last sentence, giving us the ability to impound a tent that's in violation of 3C. So it specifically does say if we're doing an operation, even if it's during the daytime, that 3C will preempt and prevail over the tent provision.
Any others? Okay, colleagues, I'd like to offer some comments and make an amendment, a recommendation. Last year I sponsored a ordinance that gives our sanitation environmental compliance officers limited peace officer arrest authority, and that wasn't because I wanted them to arrest homeless people, but because I knew we were sending them into dangerous situations where it may be necessary to detain someone. Now, many of the chronically homeless individuals are mentally ill, are addicted to drugs and alcohol, and often become violent. Our environmental compliance officers are fantastic, and they've played a critical role in ensuring public health on our sidewalks and streets, but they can't do everything, and this ordinance already places an extra burden on them with new limitations on personal property. Adding the daily removal of tents would make it impossible to ensure clean and sanitary public spaces. And we cannot take LAPD completely out of the equation. LAPD will always have a role in interacting with the homeless because they are our first responders. Daytime tents pose a real public safety hazard. If we ask our officers to enforce the law, we need to give them the tools to do so. We have already built into the ordinance a safeguard to ensure a homeless person is provided with an opportunity to comply prior to arrest. But there needs to be real consequences if they don't. As written, the only consequence would be losing their tent if and when sanitation arrives to remove it. This erodes respect for our LAPD officers, and I'm not comfortable putting them in that situation. Therefore, I'd like to request the city attorney to amend subsection 10B of the draft ordinances in version B to read, "No person shall refuse to take down, fold, deconstruct, or otherwise put away any tent erected or configured between the hours of 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. in violation of subsection 7, or willfully resist, delay, or obstruct a city employee from taking down, folding, deconstructing, putting away, moving, removing, impounding, or discarding the tent, including by refusing to vacate or retreat from the tent." In addition, request the city attorney to amend subsection 10C of the draft ordinances in version B to read, "No person shall refuse to remove any barrier, string, wire, rope, chain, or other attachment that violates section 8, or willfully resist, delay, or obstruct a city employee from deconstructing, taking down, moving, removing, impounding, or discarding the barrier, string, wire, rope, chain, or other attachment, including by refusing to vacate or retreat from an obscured area created by the attachment." We have a second and a third, looks like a second from Ms. Martinez, a third by, if you want to call it. So 10C to remove and include or after subsection 8.
And Mr. Chair, you're saying that provides some additional teeth by
Right.
doing what exactly?
Right. We feel that we're not in the business, LAPD nor our environmental compliance officers should be in the business of taking down tents. So we're giving the individual, the homeless individual, flexibility on whether or not to take down their tent or not, instead of forcing them to take it down. And I feel that based on my experience, you will have voluntary compliance moving forward.
Yeah, I hope we will. I think that if the rules are fair, we will have greater compliance. But I'm willing to wait until these protocols are fleshed out. Hopefully, they will address the concern you're raising in your motion, in your amendment, I should say. I'm not prepared to support the amendment, but I am prepared to move forward.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Could I get a clarification on the amendment? So, because the city attorney already stated that not just Bureau of Sanitation, but LAPD and everyone else has the ability to already take down the tent. You're trying to extend the ability for other city personnel to deconstruct and take down the tent, or are you trying to add more? When you say teeth, what do you mean by teeth?
It's again, giving the officers and the individual flexibility on not forcing them to take, because in this case, we would have our environmental compliance officers solely have that ability to take down a tent if an individual refuses. Has to refuse and willfully resist. So in this case, it would be refuse or willfully resist.
I thought I don't know, maybe we could have the city attorney re-explain that, but I thought the, this current ordinance states that anyone could remove or deconstruct the tents. The only thing about the arrest, can you re-explain?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think the easiest way to explain this is under the current ordinance, someone would have to both refuse to take down their own tent and
For an arrest.
willfully interfere with or resist a city employee from doing it. Right. And this, as I understand the amending motion, would be to allow for an arrest or citation if the person doesn't take down their own tent rather than forcing the city to do it. Is that
Exactly.
Right. And that, like Councilman Price, I support the amendment the motion as is. I would not be able to support the amendment at this time as well. And I think, I know the initial, I think the Homelessness and Poverty Committee asked for us to wait on the vote till the protocol was all done. I know the Bureau of Sanitation said it would be 90 days. I think it would be done a little, I spoken with some other folks, not that they thought it was going to be done a little sooner. But more importantly, I don't think the most important thing and the most important concern I had about the original ordinance, not this one, was the criminalization aspect of it. And you know, as you stated earlier, Chair, I really believe in the holistic approach, and I really hope that when the protocol comes out, that there would be as little conflict as possible. And I hope there's a whole team of folks, not just LAPD or Bureau of Engineering, but maybe our nonprofit or mental health professionals going out together so that there is no conflict. I don't think LAPD is equipped to just make arrests, and I don't know if they're comfortable with solving the problem with an arrest. You know, you're absolutely correct, Ms. Martinez. Most of the homeless individuals, when we do go out there, many will abide, others won't abide, and those who don't abide, when we try to even offer them services, they're going to refuse. Majority refuses. I mean, prior to running for office, I worked for the second largest mental health agency, and we were the largest homeless outreach provider in South Los Angeles. And it takes on average 10 outreach attempts just to get a homeless individual to want to talk to a homeless counselor. And then it takes about 10 of those after you talk to them, about 10 times to even come and get a meal or whatnot, another 10 times to make them to even consider coming into a program. So yes, majority of our homeless individuals are not going to accept our services. They're not going to come in. However, arresting them is not the solution. If we arrest them, it's going to be a revolving door, and these are petty, very minor offenses as well. And I think if we, I would love to ask the Sheriff's Department, but from what I know, our jail systems, for an offense like this, it's going to be a revolving door. They'll come in, they won't stay for a long time. Very unlikely they'll even get caught up, they'll be held up by the mental health system if they require it. So I don't think, I understand the need for wanting to clean up the streets, and I totally respect that, and I think that's what we need to do. We need to clear up our streets and make it a safe place. But at the same time, making the first line of defense being arrest. I mean, police officers and city personnel, according to the current ordinance, they still have that ability if the homeless individual refuses. So I can't support the amendment, but I am in favor of the current motion. As is.
And as it relates to the protocols, I understand and ensure that the protocols are already are moving, but they need the framework moving forward. And I know I think we discussed this back in the summer when it first came to us. And as we continue to delay this action, our quality of life and community standards continue to be disrupted. So I feel that we need, this is a sense of urgency because we're hearing it and seeing how our sidewalks are continued to be blocked. And at the same time, we're also seeing these individuals who continue, unfortunately, be victimized by the criminal element and really focused on criminalizing those who are most vulnerable. Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure that no one gets the false impression that this council, this committee, the police department, or any city department wants or intends to adopt a new ordinance with the intent of arresting homeless people. That is patently untrue. This is an ordinance that will that strikes the right balance in terms of what will compel homeless individuals to comply with 5611. I doubt very seriously if there will be any increase whatsoever in terms of homeless individuals being arrested for violating subsection 7B or C, because we're changing one word from and to the word or. I doubt very seriously this will have any impact on that. It will simply give our public safety first responders and other city personnel a little more to go on with actually enforcing the ordinance, and that's exactly what we need, and that's exactly what my constituents in the 13th District expect. And again, I want to commend the City Attorney's Office for working with the city family on crafting what I think is a very, very thoughtful way forward, which really helps clarify the issue all the way around, and I wholeheartedly support this amendment.
Ms. Martinez?
I just want to offer a slightly different perspective of this issue. You know, I represent some of the neediest communities in the San Fernando Valley. I'm talking about North Hills, Panorama City, and Sun Valley. Those of you who've never been there, I ask you to please come and see what I have to work with. These are hardworking people that get up every morning and make their way to work. And don't shame me, ma'am. I know exactly what I represent. I grew up in those areas, and there's entire families who are desperate for help. Children who have to play in parks inundated by encampments that we can't seem to be able to have a solution for. You know, we have little girls, we have small children being lured into some of these very dangerous areas in my district, in Arleta. The department can attest to this, Mr. Zaldivar. I don't know if your sanitation's been out there to clear some of these encampments. There's little girls being lured on Wingo Street. You know, there's 100 and something people living there. Why are children being lured into these areas in the community of Arleta? So those people have absolutely no voice? Who represents the people that can't use the parks, that can't find their way to schools, moms who have to walk their kids through some of these encampments? Who speaks for them? So the perspective of this homeless issue in the city has to be a balanced approach. Do not interrupt me. I am not done. The different perspectives, Mr. Rue, is that we represent a variety of people who very desperately need a lot of help, and that we need to go out and visit the 10, 20 times to be able to make sure to get them services that they need. But we also represent communities of color, of people who cannot use public space because there is no room for those children to play and take advantage of these amenities. We also have to be the voice of everyone that we represent. So, Mr. Chair, thank you for a balanced approach, and let's move forward.
Thank you, Ms. Martinez.
Sorry, can we?
Mr. Rue.
Apologies.
Excuse me, sir, you're disrupting this meeting.
You know, I do not want to delay this motion. I do not want to delay this ordinance of any kind, and I fully respect and I agree with everything you're saying, Ms. Martinez. And, you know, we do need the tools. LAPD does need the tools. And as far as I know, for this motion, without the amendment, it gives LAPD the tools, because it's my understanding that these encampments, the city of personnel will go out there. They could ask them to remove it. Many of them, as we all agreed, will probably just take them down on their own. For those who don't, city personnel has the ability to take them down. Now, if they impede in the city personnel officers from taking the tents down or get in the way in any way hindrance, then they could be arrested, or other precautions could be taken by LAPD for impeding in that. Now, for us to just allow LAPD the opportunity to just arrest the homeless individuals just by setting up an encampment, that's not going to solve our problems. That doesn't solve the root issue of the problems. The tools that I'm talking about that we really need to address is working with our state and federal elected officials, and maybe changing the definition of 5150. You know, looking into Laurel's Law. The counties has programs to start implementing it. More involuntary treatment programs. I mean, those are the tools that we need to give to LAPD, our mental health professionals, our Bureau of Sanitation, because just arresting them doesn't solve the problem. This ordinance, what it does is it doesn't tackle the homeless encampments. It just takes them down for that period of time, because they have the right to sleep in the streets. So when we expand the definition of 5150, when we do other things to make sure that these encampments don't have illegal activities, I am all for that. We should crack down on any type of illegal activity that's happening in these camps. We should do everything we can to make sure young children aren't lured into these camps. But just allowing, just giving the ability to arrest someone for just having a tent isn't going to solve the problem.
Yep. And as we know, that good points, Mr. Rue. Thanks for sharing that. We know that, again, this is a last resort, and also the importance of having Mr. Peterson, can you come back to the mic so you can just school us again that without this amendment, we're only allowing ECOs, environmental compliance officers, solely the ability to take down the tent if one refuses or resists. All 16 or 14 of them?
Would you
I'm sorry,
repeat the
20.
question?
I think if once they get out of the academy, 20 of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, let me just walk you through the process. LAPD approaches an individual who refuses to take down a tent, say at 6:15 in the morning, at which point the LAPD officer will call the ECO to help deconstruct the tent because the individual is resisting and refusing to take down the tent.
Okay.
The ECO will come out to the scene and do just that. Okay? That should be a quick ETA of, 6:15 in the morning, it's quick. But say at 5 in the afternoon, you have an officer again in Ms. Martinez's district requesting an ECO to take down a tent or an encampment because the individual is refusing and resisting. Then I have an ECO from Harbor Division has to respond with a long ETA. That's my understanding, right?
Yes, it would take us a while because of our limited resources to respond.
So in light of, for the first time in a long time, we have city, county, state officials working together on this issue. A long-term solution of bringing dollars for housing and beefing up our emergency response teams and working with the county Department of Mental Health. We need to do something to take action today because the standards are being disrupted. The quality of life is really taking a hit in this city from residents and businesses, and the importance of balancing the needs of the homeless with the needs of the people that we serve. Mr. O'Farrell, did you have something?
Thank you. Just in response to Mr. Rue, your comment, no one is suggesting that a homeless person is going to be arrested for setting up a tent. And that's what you implied, quite frankly. And that is inaccurate. And I think the police department, when I have made the rounds with them more times than I can count in the encampments that are in my district, the tradition, practice, and compassion that is shown every single time, either when I'm with them or not with them, has been an abundance of compassion, understanding, and offering services. And it's been talked about here all over the table that there is a real issue with resistance of the services for the variety of reasons that have already been explained that I don't need to go into. So again, I want to make sure that for the public record, no one gets the wrong impression that this is all about making it easy to arrest homeless people. That is not the intent, nor will it be the result of the adoption of this ordinance. And I am 100% secure in that feeling. Thank you.
Mr. Rue?
One clarifying question. So, assuming the 24-hour posting is done, or one of the other exemptions that the city attorney talked about, where for immediate removal is met, the conditions are met. So only an ECO? Because I thought LAPD or a different Bureau of Sanitation worker could deconstruct or take down these tents. Is it only an ECO? These 16? Yeah, only, and there's 16 of them citywide. So only those 16 are allowed to physically come and deconstruct a tent?
I believe Valerie addressed it. Would you like to address it?
So I think you're asking a question about what's in the ordinance versus what may be in the protocols or practice. So under the ordinance, any city official could take down the tent. But I believe that because a lot of the tents have hazardous materials in them and what have you, I think the practice has been, and the protocols may specify, that it's best to have someone from the Bureau of Sanitation actually deconstruct the tent.
So the current ordinance allows the city of LA, if we decide in our protocols to expand other types of personnel who could deconstruct these tents, to do so.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be focused only on the ECOs.
Correct.
So and Councilman O'Farrell, I did not. My intent was not to say that the first thing the LAPD or whoever comes is going to make the arrest, but currently, as is without the amendment, LAPD can still make an arrest only if the homeless individual, from my understanding, you could correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. City Attorney, that they could only arrest an individual if they willfully resist the taking down of the tent or get in the way. Right. Right, if they refuse. Right. But, so, right.
Push your button.
Right. So,
Got it.
so, just want to go through the scenario. If an individual, if the police department and an ECO or a Bureau of Sanitation worker comes to an encampment with the posting, all the other conditions are met, and they would ask the individual, can you please take down your tent? And they say no. Then under this ordinance, there's nothing else that could be done. Now, they could say, well, if you're not going to take it down, we have the ability to take down the tent, and they start deconstructing. Now, if the homeless individual just steps aside and is upset, but steps aside, and that's it. But if the homeless individual gets in the way and prevents them, physically says, from deconstructing the tent, currently, without the amendment, the police officer could make an arrest for resisting, for interfering. So I don't see why we need the extra.
The ECO is, as far as the only Department of Sanitation employees that have the arrest authority, not overall sanitation employees. That's correct, right? Okay, let's get to cards if you can, Mr. Spindler. 1 minute only. Mr. Spindler is not here. Raquel Beard. Raquel, followed by General Doggin, followed by Craig Roberts. General Dogon, followed by Craig Roberts. Please come to the mic. Ms. Beard?
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank
My name
you.
is Raquel Beard. I work for the Central City East Association. We manage the Business Improvement District and the Industrial District, and that encompasses about 80% of Skid Row. I'm happy to see this come forward. I'm so happy for the work that you've done to strike a balance, because what some people forget is there is another side to this equation, and we have 600 businesses and over a dozen residential buildings that are completely surrounded by erected tents 24 hours, 7 days a week. There are health and safety concerns for both sides of the equation. And I'm happy to see that this is moving forward with compassion and with fairness, because that's also important to us. So thank you again.
Thank you. General Delgan.
General Dogon, this draft language and related criminalization policies put homeless people even at more risk today, right? Ever since you declared a homeless state of emergency, claiming to stop the criminalization, LAPD has actually been pumping it up to another level. People are dying on the streets. People are being arrested on quality of life offenses, then held in jail just long enough for LAPD and street services to confiscate and destroy their personal property. Then as soon as they are released, hours later, their property is long gone. Now they are forced to bear back the winter storm and extreme cold weather lately, which has resulted in several people dying on Skid Row. Laws like this keep people from getting housing because it's forced them to hide under bridges and in riverbeds and other places for fear of running the LAPD and being punished for simply being homeless. Vote no on this motion. We need house keys, not handcuffs. Thank you.
Craig Roberts. Craig Roberts will be followed by JoJo Smith, Sean Gregory, and Wesley Walker. Please come to the mic. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, my name is Craig, and I'm a member of LA Can and a resident of Skid Row. And I want to talk to you about you and the other political apparatchiks' lies. For instance, your lie at the end of the 5611 hearing where you said and instructed the city attorney to draft an ordinance that would remove all elements which would effectively mean punitive or discriminatory or criminal outcomes for poor and homeless people. Another, and this is my favorite lie of yours, was the lie to the federal government when you submitted a joint continuum of care application with the county of Los Angeles for $110 million and referred to the newly amended 5611 as being free of sanctions and criminal penalties and your new decriminalized attitude. House keys, not handcuffs.
Thank you. JoJo Smith.
JoJo Smith from
Good
the Los
afternoon.
Angeles Community Action Network, Skid Row resident, unhoused resident. You know, every day I see people getting their property taken by LAPD. I'm one of them. Christmas Eve, they took my property. I don't even know where it's at. I've tried to find it. They said it's been destroyed. So it shows you that this criminalization keeps coming up. People's property are still being taken. But the thing with this is y'all sit around these tables not thinking about what the people on the streets are dealing with. LAPD needs to stop. Y'all need to stop allowing LAPD to have all this. You want to bring LAPD constantly involved in this. LAPD needs to get out of this. We need mental health workers to be involved in this, not LAPD. House keys, not handcuffs. Black Lives Matter.
Sean Gregory.
Yes, Sean Gregory here, LA Can. So y'all spent considerable amount of time declaring homeless state of emergencies, holding joint press conferences with federal and local officials declaring that housing was the only answer, and stating also that criminalization through policies such as the Safer Cities Initiative and ordinances such as or including 5611 has failed as a strategy, and we would no longer pursue that path. But here we are again pursuing that exact path. And it doesn't matter what language you adapt to 5611 to make it look good on paper. The act in of itself is still criminalizing. And I do want to say that a turd, by any other description, still smells like shit. And it's past time we flush this shit down the toilet and start finding real solutions. One being supporting SB 876, the Homeless Bill of Rights. And once we shift our efforts from treating this as a criminal issue to a social issue, we can use the resources that will be saved by doing such and put that into permanent supportive housing. Thank you.
So Wesley Walker will be followed by Karen Sobel, Charles Porter, Pastor Q. Please come forward. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Wesley Walker, LA Can. The current draft given to you by the city attorney puts at risk over to $110 million in federal funding. HUD has said clearly that they want the criminalization of the policies in this city. In this year's application, LASA has told HUD that the city was scaling back criminalization by amending 5611. This draft does not reflect that. What you talked about all day, you still plan on criminalizing folks, and you're doing it rather bluntly. This draft and the amendment proposed by Buscalino actually maintains it would and increase people getting arrested for being homeless.
Thank you.
By passing this out of this committee is risking over $100 million in funding.
Thank you,
critical
Mr. Walker.
funding. So I say to you that you need to stop messing around and do the right thing.
Thank you. Ms. Sobel.
So we've just distributed the letter from Legal Aid, which was emailed to all of you earlier today. The Levan decision did not say that the city could tag and take away unattended property. In fact, it specifically recognized that people leave their property unattended momentarily to go eat, to go to the bathroom, to go get services. The way this ordinance is written, if you do that and you get tagged, you will never be able to put your property, your personal property, on public property again. That is clear from the way this ordinance is written. And so all the police have to do is wait for the times when people go to the bathroom when they get up in the morning, go get meals, go to services, and just tag everything. That won't stand. The notion that you can take property and discard it because it is evidence of a crime is just total anathema to due process principles. If it's evidence of a crime, a person has the ability and the opportunity to challenge whether or not a crime actually occurred. But if you take that property and you discard that property immediately, due process is out the door.
Thank you.
That will not stand.
Charles Porter.
Good afternoon. I'm concerned that this proposed language will not protect our most vulnerable. And many folks that are on the streets are experiencing trauma, mental duress, and substance use disorders that are exacerbated by contact with law enforcement and the loss of property. And taking people's property is an aggressive act, and it's natural for people to respond to that. So it's kind of setting people up, to be for criminalization when you're taking people's properties and belongings, especially if they're experiencing mental health challenges. Also, in regards to compliance is grounded in communication. It's not dependent on the fear of punishment. So it's important also to get feedback from how is this process working for the people on the street. You want a holistic approach. You need to get input and feedback from the people who are trying to utilize this system. And I don't think currently it really meets the needs of the people.
Thank you. Pastor Q. Pastor Q would be followed by Eunice Hicks, Manuel Vigil, and Kevin Kay. I don't have a name on this one, Mr. If you can get Sergeant over here, take a look. Homeless T? Is Homeless T here? Okay. Go ahead, Pastor Q. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Pastor Q. I'm from the Church Without Walls, Skid Row, and from the Black Jewish Justice Alliance. This reminds me of a story in the Bible. Jesus said to the lawmakers and religious leaders, you strain out a gnat, but you swallow a camel. And the reason he said that was because they were kosher. They weren't to eat unclean things. And they would strain their drinks to make sure that a gnat didn't accidentally fall into it. He said, you strain out a gnat and you swallow a camel, which means you neglect the most important things. And you worry about the letter of the law. The true law that's been broken is a moral law. And that is to get people in housing. What we're doing is a cycle that has continued forever. House keys, not handcuffs.
Eunice Hicks? Yes. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I am Eunice Hicks. I'm probably the senior-most person of our group. I've lived in the city of Los Angeles for 59 years and counting. When I came here, this city was very beautiful, and we did not, of course, even imagine that we would face the challenge today that we face with the homeless. Last week, the stock market crashed. So not only do we have these homeless, but we can certainly agree that we probably are going to have many more challenged by the state of our economy. So what we have to do is look to solutions to get the homeless off the street rather than penalize them for being homeless. So that means that we're going to have to use our intelligence, our higher thinking, and cooperate through the city, the county, the state, and the federal. There are lands available, and I'm certain that there are houses available, and I know a process by which we can use those lands, move properties on there, and give people housing. It doesn't take a lot of money. So we'll have to learn to be creative.
Thank you, Ms. Hicks.
And not punitive.
Thank you, ma'am. Manuel Vigil, followed by Kevin Key, Shyla Myers. Please come forward, and Steve Diaz. Good afternoon.
Good morning. My name is Manuel Vigil. I'm currently homeless right now, and I live down on Skid Row. And the area that I stay at, I always keep my area clean and sanitized area. And one thing about that, you guys should help out the people that want the help, not the people that don't want the help, that don't want to go in these shelters and help out, you know what I mean? You should help the people that need the help, you know? Like, I want help. I want to get out of here, you know what I mean? But it's hard, you know, when you don't got the means to do it, you know. The state don't help you with enough to get out of there, you know what I mean? So if you guys help us out, we can get off of the streets that want to get out. But there ain't nobody going to help us out if we're going to sit on the streets all the time. We can't get out here and do what we got to do, you know what I mean, by going to jail, taking our properties. That's not good. You take our property, we come back out, we're going to be all cold. We got to hustle around again to try to go. That's why you think people go steal to get stuff, because they ain't got no place to go. You know what I mean? So it's going to be cold out there. You can put us on the street, take our tents. We're going to live on the street.
Thank you, Mr.
Vigil. On the
Vigil.
sidewalk. You know what I mean? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Key?
Yeah, my name is Kevin Michael Key. I'm a Skid Row advocate. I'm formerly homeless. I do prevention work for the United Coalition East Prevention Project. Ask the city attorney about PC 148. First time I got arrested, it was for PC 148, obstructing, resisting, violation. What was my violation? I asked 3 questions when I seen the cops had 3 brothers arrested. What happened? What'd they do? What are you going to do? I was arrested. They have plenty laws on the books already. The homeless already have it hard. Giving the police and sanitation additional discretion over their personal property and their person will only result in arbitrary enforcement against the most needy, the mentally ill, the destitute. Suppose it's raining. Suppose it's about to rain. And you say, hey man, it's about to rain. Guess what's going to happen? If you fail the attitude test, you go into jail because it's an abuse of discretion. Do the right thing. Housing, not handcuffs. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Myers, followed by Mr. Diaz, and our last speaker, Deacon. Ooh. Is there a Deacon here? Okay, there's the last speaker. Ms. Myers, good afternoon.
Yes. My name is Shayla Myers. I'm an attorney with the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles, and we've submitted a letter to council to express our concern that the city attorney's draft, as written, is inconsistent with LOS's representation to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which represented that 5611 would be amended to remove all sanctions and criminal penalties. The draft, as written, and which is an issue that the council has not addressed today, includes significant penalties for people who are homeless because it provides for the impounding of a person's personal property without due process and without any consideration. as well as without having any other justification for the impounding of that property other than the fact that the person retains that property in violation of 5611. That constitutes a significant sanction against a person who is homeless. The impact of having a person's personal property impounded has a tremendous impact for a person who is homeless. Council has not considered the impact of those sanctions on individuals who are compelled to sleep on the streets, and we believe that that is inconsistent with LOS's representation to HUD as part of the continuum of care application.
Mr. Diaz?
You call this the right balance. I call it the perfect storm. How is it that we're going to be talking about a state of emergency, talking about how we're going to address homelessness, talking about how we're no longer criminalizing, but yet we have an ordinance on the table that does exactly that. It takes away people's right to take away property, to possess property. Once it's tagged, you can no longer put it anywhere in public space. Where else are you going to put it? Vacancy rates are high. Los Angeles is one of the most unaffordable cities in the country. The city council has not reformed or created any actual housing of substance in many years. Second of all, this is just not about public space for a subgroup of people, a small number of people in the valley who might be brown. This is about every color. This is about black. This is about brown. This is about every poor person who does not have the opportunity to continue to make this great city what it is. Councilmember Buscaino, you should be ashamed of yourself. Councilmember Miri Martinez, I'm ashamed to call you a brown sister.
Please hold your applause. Deacon, thank you. Deacon and our last speaker, Pete White.
Yeah, the Los Angeles Police Department in this regard is not being honest at all. What happens is that as soon as the cop approaches the tent, he takes his switchblade out and instructs his partner to put the owner of the tent into handcuffs while he dismantles the tent. And that's what happens every day and all day in Skid Row. This business of compliance is not even an issue. They don't wait for the owner of the tent to comply. They simply, knock on the tent, ask the individual to stand outside of the tent, handcuff them, and they do their business of destroying the tent. And that happens over and over again. Yeah. So this business of whether or not we're going to deal with the owner of the tent in compliance is disingenuous if I've ever heard of it. It just does not happen in Skid Row. They put you in handcuff and they dismantle the tent daily and without permission. And that's what they do with the property is another question. But I want to be very clear that so far this whole discussion has been dishonest and disingenuous.
Pete White. Pete White's our final speaker.
Let's be clear that no one wants to live next to a tent, but even more importantly, no one wants to live in a tent. All of your attempts this afternoon, Mr. O'Farrell, to say on record, this is not criminalization, understanding the consequence for our continuum of care application falls on deaf ears, because as written, this ordinance is still criminalization. So no matter what you attempted to do on record in terms of we're not talking about arrest, is as if arrest is the only way in which criminalization happens, falls on deaf ears. The Department of Justice, HUD, right, advocates across the country are all moving the pendulum to permanent supportive housing. And criminalization has been kicked down the road. However, in Los Angeles, we continue to beat down that path. Price, you have to wake up, brother. You are going to have to wake up, brother, because we're talking about Black Lives Mattering.
Thank you.
And this represents all lives.
Here we go. Please, you're disrupting the meeting. You're disrupting the meeting. With that said, colleagues, and just to remind the audience, please speak to the item, not singling out individual council members. With that, this two choices we have here are the two choices. Are we okay with the daytime tents staying up, or do we want to see them come down? Practically and realistically, the only way we're going to have these tents come down is if people voluntarily comply with the law, and that will only happen if the law has real teeth. and we simply don't have the resources to take down every single tent that stays up during the day. With that, I ask that we approve item 1 as amended, and Mr. Clerk, we can do a verbal vote on item 1 as amended.
Item one has two ordinances. Did you wish to approve the alternative or ordinance B as proposed by the city attorney?
8 will approve B.
Okay, ordinance B, and including the amendment proposed by the committee chair, I will call a roll call vote. Vizcaíno?
Aye.
Martinez? Aye. Price? O'Farrell?
Aye.
Rue? 3-2, the ayes have it.
Thank you so much, and thank you, colleagues, and to the city staff for this ongoing dialogue that we're having to, again, try to strike the proper balance between addressing the needs of the homeless community with improving our quality of life here in the city of Los Angeles. With that, that is the last item, and we are now adjourned. Thank you. Thanks, guys.